Hey everyone, welcome back to Rise and Thrive. I'm Shay Blackman, and if you're new here, this is the space where we dig into the real strategies Black women leaders need to thrive in corporate America. Not the motivational fluff, but the actual frameworks that move you forward. Today, we're diving into Chapter 5 of my book, Rise and Thrive, a Black woman's blueprint for leadership excellence, and we're talking about executive communication. But before you think this is another speak up more or find your voice conversation, let me stop you right there. Zora Neale Hurston said, "There is no agony like bearing an untold story inside you." Read that again. There is no agony like bearing an untold story inside you. Now, why am I opening with this quote? Because here's what I've learned working with hundreds of Black women leaders over my 24 plus years in HR and organizational leadership. We all have untold stories. Stories of impact, stories of innovation, stories of how we saved a project, turned around a team, or navigated impossible situations with grace and strategy. But too often, those stories stay inside us, untold, unheard, and unrecognized. And that silence, it's costing us. It's costing us promotions, it's costing us visibility, it's costing us influence. And in 2026, as we're navigating workplaces that are actively rolling back DEI initiatives, remote work policies, and equity-focused leadership development, your ability to communicate your values strategically isn't just important, it's survival. So today, we're going to unpack why executive communication is fundamentally different when you're a Black woman leader, how to tell your story in ways that actually get heard, and how to protect your voice while you're doing it. Let's get into it. Let's start with what nobody wants to say out loud. Executive communication advice is written for people who already have the benefit of the doubt. Be confident, speak up in meetings, share your wins. All of that sounds great until you realize that when you're a Black woman, confidence can be read as aggression. Speaking up can be labeled as disruptive. And sharing your wins, well, that can quickly turn into the perception that you're difficult, too ambitious, or, everyone's favorite, not a team player. Let me give you a real-world example. There was a company I worked with where a Black woman director was consistently passed over for promotion. Her performance reviews were stellar. Her team loved her. She delivered results that exceeded expectations. But when I dug into the feedback from her leadership, one theme kept coming up. We're not sure she's ready for the next level. She doesn't really communicate her impact. Now here's the kicker. I sat in on one of her presentations, and she was clear, data-driven, and strategic. So what was the problem? She wasn't performing confidence in the way they expected. She wasn't centering herself in the story. She was doing what so many of us have been socialized to do, highlighting the team, deflecting credit, staying humble. And in corporate America, humility is a virtue until it's costing you visibility. That's the tension. We're taught to be collaborative, to elevate others, to not be too much. But the rules of executive communication reward visibility, assertiveness, and self-promotion. And if you're a Black woman, you're navigating that tension every single day. So when we talk about executive communication, we're not just talking about how to speak. We're talking about how to be heard, believed, and valued in spaces that are actively questioning whether you belong there in the first place. And that's why this chapter matters. All right, let's get tactical. Because the goal here isn't just to understand the problem, it's to have a framework you can use starting tomorrow. In Chapter 5, I introduced something I call the STAR E framework. If you've ever been in a leadership development program or done interview prep, you've probably heard of the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. It's a classic way to structure your responses in interviews or performance conversations. But here's the problem. STAR is great for recounting what you did. It's not great for communicating strategic impact. And when you're a Black woman leader trying to demonstrate executive presence, recounting what you did isn't enough. You have to connect your actions to business outcomes in ways that are undeniable. That's where the E comes in. STAR E adds one more critical layer: effect. Let me break it down. Situation. Set the context. What was happening in the business or on your team? What was the challenge or opportunity? Task. What was your specific responsibility? What were you asked to do? Or what did you see needed to happen? Action. What did you actually do? This is where you get specific. Don't say, led a team. Say, facilitated a cross-functional working group of 12 stakeholders across operations, finance, and sales to align on a go-forward strategy. Result. What happened because of your actions? This is your data point. We reduced cycle time by 30%. We retained 95% of our high performers during a restructure. We launched the product 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Effect. Here's the game changer. This is where you connect your result to the broader business impact or strategic priority. This reduction in cycle time freed up $200,000 in operating costs that we reinvested into innovation. That retention rate meant we didn't lose critical institutional knowledge during the merger, which set us up to integrate faster than any other division. Do you see the difference? The E isn't just about what you did, it's about why it mattered. It's about elevating your story from task execution to strategic leadership. And here's why that matters for us as Black women. When you communicate at the effect level, you're not waiting for someone to connect the dots. You're making it impossible for them to dismiss your contribution. Let me give you another example. Let's say you're in a performance review and you want to talk about how you improve team morale. Here's what most people say. I implemented a new recognition program and morale improved. Okay, that's nice, but it doesn't communicate strategic value. Now let's run that through star E. Situation, during Q3, our team engagement scores dropped to 62%, which was 15 points below the company average and put us at risk for turnover during a critical product launch. Task, I was asked to identify solutions that could be implemented quickly without a significant budget increase. Action, I designed a peer-to-peer recognition program that aligned with our company values, trained team leads on consistent application, and tied recognition to quarterly performance metrics. Result, within 2 quarters, our engagement scores increased to 78%, and we saw 0 regrettable turnover during the product launch. Effect, that stability meant we didn't have to onboard new team members mid-project, which saved us an estimated $75,000 in recruiting and ramp-up costs. More importantly, it set a culture standard that 3 other teams adopted, which contributed to our division's overall engagement improvement. Do you hear the difference? That's executive communication. That's the story that gets remembered when it's time to talk about promotions, stretch assignments, and leadership opportunities. And here's the beautiful part. This framework works everywhere. Performance reviews, one-on-ones with your manager, networking conversations, LinkedIn posts, wherever you need to communicate your value, star E gives you the structure to do it powerfully. Now, let's talk about something that comes up in almost every conversation I have with Black women leaders. Code switching. You know what I'm talking about. It's the way we adjust our language, tone, and communication style depending on who we're talking to. In meetings with senior leadership, we might sound one way. With our teams, we sound another. With our Black colleagues, we can finally breathe and just be ourselves. And listen, I'm not here to tell you that code switching is wrong. It's a survival skill. It's how many of us have navigated predominantly white corporate spaces and stayed employed. But here's the tension. Code switching can become exhausting. And when we're constantly performing a version of ourselves that we think is more palatable, more acceptable, more executive, we can lose touch with the power of our authentic voice. So the question isn't, should I code switch? The question is, how do I communicate strategically without losing myself in the process? Here's what I want you to consider. Strategic communication isn't about changing who you are. It's about being intentional with how you show up in different contexts. There's a difference between performing for acceptance and adapting for impact. When you're performing, you're molding yourself into what you think they want to see. You're shrinking, you're filtering, you're playing it safe because you're worried that the real you isn't enough. But when you're adapting for impact, you're making conscious choices about what to emphasize, how to frame your message, and what language will resonate with your audience, all while staying grounded in your values and your truth. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're presenting a new initiative to the executive team and you know they care deeply about cost savings and efficiency. You could present your idea exactly the way you conceived it, talking about team morale, equity, and creating a more inclusive culture. And if that's your authentic passion, absolutely lead with that. But here's the adaptation for impact. You can also frame it in terms of retention costs, productivity metrics, and competitive advantage, not because you're selling out, not because you don't care about the equity piece, but because you know your audience and you know that if they see the business case first, they're more likely to support the initiative that will ultimately create the culture change you care about. That's strategy. That's not code switching in the performance sense. That's executive communication. And here's where Zora Neale Hurston comes back in. She said, "There is no agony like bearing an untold story inside you." The untold story isn't just the story you're not sharing, it's the story you're not telling because you're too busy trying to fit into someone else's narrative. Your story, your full, authentic, unapologetic story has power. The goal isn't to hide it, the goal is to tell it in ways that let people hear it. Let's be real. Not every environment is safe for your voice. Some of you are working in spaces where you've tried to speak up and it backfired. You've shared your ideas and they were dismissed, only to watch someone else present the same idea 2 weeks later and get praise for it. You've advocated for yourself and suddenly you're labeled as difficult. So here's what I want to offer you: the shield strategy. This is a concept I developed over years of working with Black women leaders who needed to protect their voices while still advancing their careers. Because sometimes survival means knowing when to speak and when to strategically hold back. The shield strategy has three components. One, know your audience. Not every room is your room. Not every conversation deserves your best ideas. Before you share something valuable, whether it's a strategic insight, a new initiative, or a piece of feedback, ask yourself, is this audience safe? Will they credit me? Will they use this to elevate me or to elevate themselves? If you're in a meeting with leadership who has consistently overlooked your contributions, maybe that's not the moment to share your breakthrough idea. Maybe that's the moment to document it, take it to a sponsor or mentor first, and find a different avenue to get it heard. I'm not saying hide your brilliance. I'm saying protect it. There's a difference. Two, document everything. This one is non-negotiable. Every time you communicate something significant, whether it's in a meeting, an email, or a one-on-one, document it. Send a follow-up email summarizing what you shared, copy relevant stakeholders, build a paper trail. Why? Because when your idea gets co-opted, when your contribution gets erased, when someone tries to rewrite history, you have receipts. I've seen this play out too many times. A Black woman shares a strategic recommendation in a meeting, it gets dismissed. 3 months later, a white colleague presents the same idea and suddenly it's brilliant. And when she tries to speak up, she's told, "Well, we don't remember you saying that." Documentation is your shield. 3, build your amplification network. You can't do this alone. You need people in the room who will amplify your voice, who will say, "Actually, Shay raised that point earlier. Let's make sure we give her credit." You need people who will forward your emails to senior leaders with a note that says, "This is worth your attention." You need people who will open doors and create opportunities for you to be heard. And here's the thing, that network doesn't happen by accident. You have to be intentional about building it. Identify the people who genuinely support you. Invest in those relationships and be willing to amplify others in return. The shield strategy isn't about being defensive. It's about being smart. It's about recognizing that not every space is built for you to thrive, and sometimes protecting your voice is the most strategic thing you can do. Now, let's bring it back to Zora Neale Hurston because her life and work offer us a masterclass in executive communication. Even though she wasn't in corporate America, Zora was a writer, anthropologist, and storyteller who refused to shrink herself to fit into anyone's expectations. In the 1930s and 40s, when the dominant narrative about Black life was written by white authors or filtered through the lens of what white audiences wanted to hear, Zora told Black stories in Black voices. She wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God, a novel that centered a Black woman's journey towards self discovery and autonomy. And she did it unapologetically, using Black vernacular, Black culture, and Black joy as the foundation of the story. And you know what happened? She was criticized. Even within the Black literary community, some critics said her work was too focused on folklore, that it didn't address the, quote, serious issues of racism and oppression in the ways they thought it should. But Zora didn't change her story. She didn't code switch to make her work more palatable. She said, in her own words, I am not tragically colored. There is no great sorrow dammed up in my soul, nor lurking behind my eyes. She refused to let anyone else define her narrative. And here's the lesson for us. Your story doesn't have to fit the narrative that others expect. Your communication doesn't have to conform to the template that was written for someone else. Zora's work wasn't appreciated in her lifetime the way it should have been. She died in poverty. But decades later, her voice became one of the most celebrated in American literature. Because the truth is, authentic, powerful communication has a way of outlasting the critics. Now, I'm not saying you have to sacrifice your career to be authentic. What I'm saying is this: don't underestimate the power of your story. Don't let fear of judgment keep you from telling it. And don't let anyone convince you that your voice is too much, too bold, or too unapologetic. Your untold story isn't just costing you, it's costing the people who need to hear it. All right, let's make this actionable. Here's what I want you to do this week. Think about one accomplishment from the past 6 months, something you're proud of, something that had impact. Now write it out using the STAR E framework. Situation, what was the context? Task, what were you responsible for? Action, what did you do? Be specific. Result, what was the outcome? Effect, why did it matter to the business or the broader strategy? Write it out. Practice saying it out loud, and then use it. Use it in your next one-on-one. Use it in your next performance review. Use it in a LinkedIn post. Because here's the truth. Executive communication is a skill, and like any skill, it gets better with practice. You've got this. So let's bring it all together. Executive communication isn't about sounding more polished or more corporate. It's about being strategic with your voice. It's about telling your story in ways that connect your impact to business outcomes. It's about protecting your voice when you need to and amplifying it when the opportunity is right. And most importantly, it's about refusing to let your story go untold. Because Zora was right. There is no agony like bearing an untold story inside you, but there's also no power like finally telling it. If you want to go deeper on this, grab a copy of Rise and Thrive, a Black woman's blueprint for leadership excellence. Chapter 5 goes into even more detail on frameworks, real-world scenarios, and strategies you can use to elevate your communication. And if you haven't downloaded the Shield Resilience Strategy Guide yet, what are you waiting for? It's free, it's practical, and it's designed specifically for Black women leaders navigating corporate spaces. The link is in the description. Here's my question for you this week. What's one story you've been holding back in your professional space? And what do you think it's costing you? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and your question might just inspire next week's episode. And hey, if this resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. New episodes drop every Wednesday. And if you want more leadership insights throughout the week, check out my Unlock, Empower, Transform podcasts on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But remember, Wednesdays are ours. I'll see you next week. Until then, keep rising, keep thriving, and tell your story.